Today, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Russell Lonser, a true leader and innovator in the field of neurosurgery. As the chair of the Department of Neurological Surgery at The Ohio State University, Dr. Lonser has dedicated his career to advancing patient care, pioneering research in drug delivery and tumor biology, and mentoring the next generation of neurosurgeons. His work has shaped the way we approach brain, spinal cord, and pituitary tumors, and his influence extends beyond the operating room. Dr. Russell Lonser, welcome to Neurosurgery Tales. I'm so excited to have you here today. And your work as a neurosurgeon, researcher, a leader has had an incredible impact not only in the OR, but also in advancing and understanding tumors and drug delivery in neurosurgery. So I'm looking forward to explore your journey.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You've emphasized in previous interviews the importance of passion as a driver in neurosurgery. How do you maintain this passion over decades in your career?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, you've always got to be curious. You constantly have to evolve as a surgeon, as a person. Otherwise, things can get very boring. I mean, surgery, we tend to have, when we leave training, very defined ways we manage things. And I can tell you over the last 20 plus years, the way we manage patients and do surgery is very different than when I finished training. And I think that's what keeps you passionate, that desire to keep evolving as a person and not remain static. And that's what I think is so exciting about neurosurgery.
And you've highlighted the importance of embracing the journey. How has this mindset helped you navigate the challenges in your career? Because neurosurgeon career is a very challenging one.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think, that, embracing that journey has been critical because I think it keeps you active every day. You're not just looking for, to achieve, achieving milestones is important and keeps you engaged. If you're just worried about achieving very specific things throughout your career, you'll very rapidly become unfulfilled, I think, because you're not looking to the next step. Life isn't static. Your career is not static. You're really evolving as a person, as a surgeon throughout that entire time. And that's really what the journey is about. It's getting up every day. It's, maintaining your focus, doing the best you can. But I think it's always looking to the future. How are things going to be different that you're doing today in 5 years and 3 years? And that's what's so exciting. I mean, neurosurgery is one of the fields in medicine, I think, where we're evolving probably faster than just about any field. When you look at the technology, the data that's coming into it, and the way we're managing that, and the complexity and the difference, the diversity of diseases that we're managing, really makes it, in my mind, still the most fascinating field in medicine to be in.
And from NIH to Ohio State, you've navigated significant career transitions. How did your leadership style evolve to adapt to these distinct environments?
Yeah, I think the environments were very different. I think at the core, the leadership style remains the same. I think what that means is really, any programs that grow or build or are successful, whether it's medicine or not, really are driven by the people. It's cliche almost to say, but it's really true. It's, finding the best fits for culture. I forget, it said years in the 60s, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's really true. It's really the culture, the people that are working. You'll see that, as I mentioned before, in any, field out in and outside of medicine. From a leadership standpoint, it's really investing in the people and making sure, I think your real job as a leader is to hire the right people to develop the culture that's going to really enable growth. And in our field, it's innovation, and as well as patient care and teaching.
And you've stressed the importance of focused practice for young neurosurgeons. How can trainees effectively identify their subspecialty early in their careers, but still don't feel prematurely committed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's really the reality of neurosurgery today. We see less and less generalists by the day almost as they're finishing up. If you look back from when I finished, generalists were the most common, where you could subspecialize in something, but you did general neurosurgery. Today, in our group, all of our surgeons are subspecialized. They're subspecialized in their clinical practice, surgical practice, call practice, all of that. And it's you can see the field is so diverse, and it requires a very defined skill set. But while you're in training, the complexity is really differentiating at some level, particularly as you're going into the research years, what you want to do. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen it and others have seen it in life and in neurosurgery. You really understand probably pretty early on, if you're exposed to everything over the
Mm-hmm.
first couple years of training, you will feel, a pull or a passion toward one of those subspecialties, maybe two, but it allows you to kind of decide early on what you want to do, because I do think the different subspecialties in neurosurgery do provide very different outlets and require very different skill sets versus 25, 30 years ago. So it is early. I do think in a program that provides you the opportunity in your first 2 or 3 years to decide,
Mm-hmm.
really get in-depth exposure, and you should be able to, that you can make, a pretty well-informed decision about what you want to do, and that's just the way I think neurosurgery has gone. I don't think it's going that way. I think it's already gone that way.
Yeah. And you've highlighted the value of asking simple yet profound research questions. How can we find those questions, like how to ask the right questions in a research?
Right. I think that it comes to you naturally. I learned this, Ed Oldfield was one of my mentors, that I worked with as a resident fellow and as a faculty member. And it was a simple questions. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
big, complex. It's thinking about, if no matter what your subspecialty, there's common problems that are sometimes really not looked at that, in depth, because they seem simple and mundane. But those are really the things that may have huge impact. I think it's using the tools you have around you. I mean, most of my research at the NIH was natural history studies. And on the translational side, it was drug delivery. But in the natural history studies, we simply followed patients carefully for
Mm-hmm.
many years. And we learned more from that than some more, sometimes first in human small trials that have that role. Both those types of research have their roles. But really just taking advantage of your environment every day. And by that, I mean, looking for the questions that need to be answered, and looking and asking simple questions to answer that. Utilizing the patient populations and tools that you have available to you, no matter where you're at in the world, and just doing things in a conscientious, defined way will, answer some of the biggest, most vexing questions we have in neurosurgery.
NIH funding is highly competitive and can be daunting for early career neurosurgeon researchers. What approaches have you found the most effective in crafting a really successful grant application?
Yeah. So I think even before the grant application is find a good mentor that really will invest time into you, that has the time to do it. That's really important. Someone that you can talk to about. It's really in the area you want to do it. I think that is just as important as writing a good grant application is sticking with it. We know from data within neurosurgery and in other surgical specialties, when it comes to NIH funding, that if you continue to stick with it, sometimes it could be, sometimes somebody gets lucky the first time around or second time around and gets it. Sometimes it takes years, but if you stick with it, we know with a surety that you will eventually get funded. As surgeons, we tend to, complete cases and tasks and things like that. Human nature want to be rewarded for that, but sometimes this is a longer play. And I would also say that, great research funding doesn't always emanate from the NIH. NIH is incredibly important. There's other federal funding sources, NSF, DOD, DARPA, whole host of other areas. But there's other strategies with foundational funding across virtually every disease you can imagine. And I think there's also industry funding. More and more, we're exploring partnerships around that. And it's not one size fits all. I think, it's really what you love. And that's the journey. Is maybe not all neurosurgeons are cut out or desire to do NIH funded research. And similarly, not all neurosurgeon scientists are cut out to do industry related research and things like that. But depending on if you're in device development or drug development or, whatever form you take, there will be better outlets. Some may be more industry related, some may be more foundational, some may be more NIH related. So I think it goes back to your earlier question about what you're passionate about. Figure out what you're passionate about and that's the subspecialty. Figure out what type of research you're most passionate about. That can be basic translational or clinical. And then I think you can figure out from there, what's the best avenue to get your ideas and your science supported.
And what do you believe are the hidden factors or probably overlooked details that can elevate a grant proposal, no matter what type of grant proposal is that, from good to exceptional?
Yeah. So I think, I just reviewing a grant this morning with one of our scientists, junior scientists, and it's really keeping it simple, keep the ideas, the concepts of why you're doing the research simple and clear. Most reviewers will never have the scope of understanding of the disease or problem you're looking at. They'll touch on parts of that. Make sure you write a logical, coherent grant. So it flows from, here's why this is important. Here's why we're going to do something differently. And here's what the objectives to achieve or prove or disprove what we're hoping, hypothesis at the end of the day. But I think it's simple as keeping it very clear and simple. I think a lot of times early investigators become too diffuse, too complex, when really what a grant reviewer wants is simple, clear ideas that can be easy, that the question could be addressed by what you're doing and not overdoing it or making it overly complex.
And you also work with the NFL's Head, Neck, and Spine Medical Committee, that has influenced rule changes and concussion protocols, which have undergone significant revisions. What area do you believe still need improvement to better protect the athletes?
I think there's a lot of great protections in place that didn't exist over a decade ago. And that's across all sports. I mean, you can take the NFL, but you could also take auto racing. So I think, and when you look at those different areas, and it will go beyond the NFL, it could be soccer, it could be a whole other host of things. I think it's prevention. We tend to sometimes forget about prevention, but I think prevention is absolutely key. I think diagnosis. I mean, if you look at how concussion is diagnosed today on the field, and that's not just at the professional levels, it's everywhere. It was led by the NFL, though, for years. And I think what that is diagnosing it. Whereas sometimes we may not have 20 years ago, what would have been considered simply, a bump in the head. Now we know is a concussion because we're more acute or much more in tune to diagnosing and understanding it. So I think prevention, diagnosis, and I think the final phase is, how are we going to manage concussion? We still aren't. This is a sport-wide and work-wide issue that we're really looking for young neuroscientists across a whole different variety of areas for doing that, and better managing that. And we are getting better by the every year that goes on. We're better managing these athletes and workers because concussion occurs in workplace areas as much as anything. And, but I think each of those is going to have a different preventative thing. You go to when you talk about the rules changes, everything can evolve from workplace safety into sports safety, but it's going to be a little different in the difference between different sports using changes and things like that. So I think there's opportunities in all three of those areas.
And chronic traumatic encephalopathy remains a critical concern in contact sports. People will not stop playing those sports. So what do you see as the next steps in understanding and mitigating its effects?
Yes, that's a great question. So I think, first of all, we have to take a step back. Sports athletes do much better, or students that are involved in athletics, particularly team sports, do better socially, do better professionally, scholastically than non-athletes. So there are incredible positive benefits to being involved in sports that sometimes we don't talk about enough, but those, we tend to, for important reasons, focus on injury and things. And that's an important thing to focus on. But it's important to understand the benefits of sports that are profound, in a young person's life. When it comes to chronic traumatic encephalopathy or CTE, first of all, we really need to understand what it is and what's caught, how that is impacted and what are the other influences that can, make someone more susceptible or less susceptible to those issues. And remember, it was only 2019 that the consensus group was formed through the NIH for how to diagnose this. So we're still 5 years of understanding.
Yeah.
The work was published in 2021. So I think we need to continue to develop understanding around diagnosis. which is always at this current stage post-mortem.
Mm-hmm.
I think and it is occurring, we need to be able to diagnose it in a pre-mortem or ante-mortem state so that we can see if, first of all, what are things we can do to prevent it? What are things we can do to treat it? Is this, a chronically progressive problem? Is it can it become static, or is it reversible by doing things? Many of the syndromes or clinical findings associated with CTE mirror some of the most common disorders that we see in the general population. That includes depression, anxiety, sleeplessness, a whole host of things. And it's really, we need to better understand what, how do we diagnose it and then ultimately manage it? And I think the best ways of doing that is simply going to be, we do need prospective long-term natural history studies. We need to find out why some sports like, being a jockey where the concussion rate is magnitudes of order higher than what we see in football players, yet the incidence of that, the known or published incidence of that is significantly lower. So why are those types of things occurring? We need to better understand all of those things so that we can get a better handle on managing it in the future. But there's a huge area of necessary research need.
Your work with NFL obviously exemplifies how neurosurgery impacts public health. What areas of public health do you believe neurosurgeons should be more actively involved in?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail. Public safety, where it's important in diseases, disorders, and things we impact. I think it goes back to your first question, related to passion and journey. I think that we need to really begin to look at ways potentially where we can treat diseases that aren't traditionally considered neurosurgical diseases. I mean, we're on, for example, gene therapy in Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, frontotemporal dementia, multisystem atrophy, metabolic disorders, diseases that weren't previously considered surgical diseases that we could now potentially treat in the near future. I mean, ADC deficiency just got FDA registration. It's the first direct perfusion and neurosurgical treatment for that by perfusing, using gene therapy. I think there's other ways that we can move the field forward just by our ability to directly monitor epilepsy, deep brain stimulation, monitor in disease states electrophysiologically, and our ability to access tissue and things like that, in disease states as well, really are the areas where we need to be leading and innovating and changing the shape of the field. And so I think that's where we're going to be in the future. Areas we don't even can today.
Yeah. And lastly, if neurosurgery had its own secret society, what would the initiation test be?
It would be the ability is having grit at the end of the day. That means, and to me, that means going to work without a reward every day or the pat on the back, but just knowing you're doing the best you can, because it's that long, long journey, where the accumulated small wins and showing up and doing the best you can every day, that would be the initiation into it. And very, very few people in society today, yesterday, or even in the distant past, really have what it takes to be confronted with the complexities of the patients and work and stress that we deal with, but also stick around to shape and drive the field to see what the successes and how things will be different. We really are at the tip of the spear, I think, in healthcare to having impact in the disorders we treat today, as well as disorders that we'll be able to treat in the distant and near-term future.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.